Hello there everyone, and welcome to the Light Kit Pro 3 training series. In this video, we're going to be going over the light in Light Kit Pro. The purpose of this is going to be to kind of tackle every single setting in there, do a really technical overview of what each button does. Be sure to check out some of the videos from Chad, the quick start, and some of the more artistic videos to maybe get more of a workflow of lighting things and be a little more artistic. These are the more technical videos. Now, right away, we've got this nice little monster here that's included with Light Kit from the browser, just something for us to be lighting as we go. But to start out with, why don't we go ahead and actually I'm going to go and delete these. I'm assuming that you just finished doing the install video and you're checking out how to use the Light Kit here. The first thing that we want to do is throughout most of these videos, we are going to be going under the assumption that you've already put the Light Kit Pro 3 load palette. You already clicked this and you've already loaded those into your interface. I'm going to click it. I'm going to drag our lights over and our cycs over. Let's go ahead and close that, and I'm going to go Window, Customize, Save as Startup Layout, and now those icons will be there all the time. These give you access to all the lights, the Light Kit Studio, the Light Kit browser, and all the cycs really quickly instead of kind of hunting the plugin menu, tracking it down, going to these flyouts. Now, having said that, we are going to go ahead and start playing with our basic light. So let's go ahead and click on this flyout, and you can load any of these immediately, but it's important to note that all the different light types inside of Light Kit can swap between each other. So let's just start out by creating a softbox square, and let's go ahead and zoom out, and you can see that we've got a softbox set up in here. Now, the first thing to note is whatever your current renderer is set to in your render settings. So if I go ahead and hit Command or Control B, this is going to pop this open. You can see I'm already in standard, but you can go to physical. If you are in Redshift, then this will be created in Redshift. If you're in Octane, it'll be created in Octane. Now, once again, a Light Kit is created to work with standard, physical, Octane, Arnold, and Redshift. It's very, very important to note that we are keeping Light Kit 3 up to date on the most up-to-date version of all those third-party renderers. So if you're working on an older version of Octane, maybe they changed the way brightness works. Maybe they changed a setting and it just won't work. And potentially those third-party renderers, Cinema 4D is very stable. The third-party renderers, they're a little more prone to crashing. So that's always possible. Make sure you're the most up-to-date version of Light Kit and the most up-to-date version of those third-party renderers. But in any case, we've got our softbox, and it was created as standard and physical right out of the gate, ready to go. Light Kit works in version R14 all the way up. Now you can change your renderer from this setting, whichever one you are on by default. That's what's going to automatically apply, but let's go ahead and leave it at standard physical and look at some of our settings. We're just going to go through these kind of like one by one as long as it makes sense. So let's go ahead to our first one, which is going to be POV placement. If I click on that, our perspective is going to jump to that of the light. And now you can see I can actually move around my model and light it. And it's going to get darker as I move away and brighter as I get closer. And we can place this light exactly where we want to. And if I click on POV placement again, we're going to zip out of the light, and I can see we've placed it over in that new location. And so now we could go and click on our menu and click on, let's say, a ring light, and that ring light's created where that one used to be. And let's go ahead and maybe just move that off to the side, and I can go and click on an umbrella light. And now we've got three different lights in there. I can move this over, and our object is being lit up. And now we can talk about our next setting, which is solo. Any button that whichever light I'm on, if I go ahead and I click the solo button, then the other lights are going to be put into layers and it's going to be automatically hidden so we can look at just the light that we're working on. Now that we've got that going, we could go and make tweaks to the lighting. We could change the color, really dial in just this one light, make it look exactly the way we want to. And then we can click the solo button again and all the other ones will appear back in. Now, what's additionally nifty about this is we can actually grab any given light. Well, we can move those around, but instead of clicking the solo button, we can actually just double click on any icon of the actual lights themselves and it will automatically solo that one. So I can click on this one, I can make that one blue, see exactly how that looks, maybe make this a little closer, get that nice and bright. And now I want to solo my softbox. I can double click on that one and it's automatically going to jump the solo to that softbox and we can light that one up exactly how we want to. When we're all done with that, just double click on the light that has been soloed and it's going to turn them all off and all of our lights reappear and we've got this ready to rock, super easy placement, really cool looking, and just a really great workflow. Next up is a question mark button, which will send you to the training page, which is what you're probably on right now watching this video. Next up, we have our viewport mode. Our viewport mode is to maybe the lights are eating up some of your screen real estate. This one isn't too bad, but okay, maybe this umbrella, it's getting a little bit in your way and you want to be able to see it here and not have it blocking. So you can click on the umbrella in the viewport, and you can right away, we can click from detailed to medium. We're going to kind of get this boxy view of the light casting onto our monster here. And now we can see through it. It's not eating up too much space. We can grab this light over here and I could say, you know what? I want this to be in the minimal view. And now it's a very minimal, just kind of an outline there. Now what's great about setting those modes is if you go ahead and you hit render, they are still existing fully. All their geometry is there. When you send them out to the viewport, you can barely see the back of this, but you see there's a little bit of light where that's casting, and this umbrella was still there. So those will still show up fully in your finals. It's just a good way of them hiding from your viewport. I'm going to go ahead and set those both up to detailed again. Next up, we have our mount type. So we've got a ceiling set by default. I can go ahead and switch this to floor, and that is going, let me actually click floor. And now you can see that it's going to swap to a floor stand. And it's a little tiny right now, but I can click on this handle and make it a little bit bigger. And now we are working from a floor stand. We will talk more about those stands when we get to the mount tab. Next up is switching our light types. Like I said, any light can be swapped to any other type of light. So I can go ahead and click on this drop down and say I want a ring light. It'll automatically swap to that. Or we can click on these icons and jump to all the different light types via that. Very quick to do. Important to note that this final one is an ambient light, which is pretty different than the rest of them. If I click on that, you see it's automatically going to jump to 000, and it creates an ambient light everywhere. And you see there's a lot less settings on that one. But in any case, I can click back on our different, back onto a softbox. It's going to pop back into position, and we are ready to continue. Now, an important thing to note is a concept that we've kind of introduced in Light Kit 3 is the idea of separating your cast light from your reflected light. And this is really important for a couple of reasons, but let's go ahead and check this out. And it's going to be easiest to see if maybe we turn on a third-party renderer. So I'm actually going to grab all three of our lights, and I'm going to say, you know what? I want you to be in redshift, and it's going to switch out those modes. Now, I've already got a material applied on this monster, and it's already a redshift material. I already had that prepped. But now I can go ahead into our redshift renderer, and I can turn on my render view, and now we kind of popped open this redshift IPR setting, and we go ahead and turn on, hit play, start or stop the IPR, and it's going to update, load all that in. And now as we rotate our camera and we move lights around, then this IPR is automatically going to update for us. Now that we got the model loaded in, it's looking all really nice here. So we're going to mostly worry about this nice soft box off to the side and talk about cast light and reflected light. Now the cast light is kind of just the light coming off the light object. So we can go ahead and crank that up, and you see it's going to get way brighter. We pull it way down, it's going to get way dimmer. But let's go ahead and pull this way down, and you can see we actually see these reflections. We've got these really light reflections showing up on it. And that is the reflected intensity. We can go ahead and crank that up, and now you see that that is even higher, and we can type in even higher numbers than that. Let's make it 3 times brighter than that. And now, even though he's not very reflective, he has a very bright reflection from this light. So we've decoupled the cast light from the reflected light, so you can really get a nice bling from a light. Or you'd be like, you know what? I don't want much reflection from that, almost none, and you really pull that out. And then on top of that, we have our master intensity, and this is a multiplier. Our master intensity is a multiplier on the other two, so we can brighten them and dim them overall, but we wanted the primary control to be brightening them individually. Now, moving on, we have samples. Samples will automatically adapt based on your renderer. Redshift, its basic samples are usually 64, but if you were saying Octane or Arnold, that's a different number of samples, and these sliders will tie directly in with that. Next up is pretty straightforward. It's our color, so I can go ahead and click on that, and we can manually set that to something like green, but we've got a nice kind of Kelvin scale set up in here, so you can say, I want a warm light, or I want a cool light, or you can click on the middle and just jump right back to white light. And really easy and quick to do that. Next up, we've got a normalize, and normalize is not something that you see normally in a basic standard in physical, but it's in all the third-party renderers, and we made it work in physical. So what this does is right now, if I were to grab, in fact, why don't we isolate that light? I can double click on it, isolate it, and boom, see it real nice there in the IPR. But now I can hit T for scale and scale it up, and you see that even though the light's getting bigger, this isn't getting any brighter. So the scale of the light is independent from the brightness. Now, it's important to note that all of our lights and all of our presets inside the browser, all assuming a normalized workflow turned on. But you can turn it off, and if I turn that off here, you see it's going to set to kind of a different brightness. But now if I scale this light up bigger, it's actually getting brighter, and if we make it smaller, it's actually getting dimmer. But once again, our overall workflow is assuming that you do have it turned on, so we're going to go and leave that on. Next up is size and placement, and this is something I really love inside of this new version of LightKit. Let's see if we can see this in the viewport a little bit better. I'll kind of see both. First of all, you've seen I've been kind of navigating around. I'm going to move this down. I've been kind of navigating around in the viewport just by hitting the letter E for move, and I can just grab my light and move it anywhere in the scene that I want to. You see we're getting really nice feedback in our IPR, and we're just getting this really great navigation. It's a really fun, intuitive way of moving your light around. An important thing to note with LightKit 3 over the previous light kits is that the axis of the previous light kits used to be at the center, and you had to control it via the sliders, but now our axis is right on the light. So we can move it around. It's constantly targeting the center by default. We can also grab the arrows and move those around. It's just working nice and intuitively. But you'll see if I click over onto our light kit settings here on the softbox and I move it around, you see that we've got some sliders that are automatically updating to match what we've got here. So you can actually jump over here now and we can increase or decrease our distance. We can grab our rotation and spin around exactly from where we were around the object. And we can grab our pitch and go up to 90 degrees overhead or 90 degrees on the ground. We can also go negative by dragging it down and up. And you'll see all this time that the stand is automatically adapting and going to the placement, the exact placement of where that light is. We've also got tilt, so we can tilt the light from one side to the other and go negative if we want to. And we've got an overall scale slider to really quickly change the height and width simultaneously. Now, that's all using target. We've got target turned on by default, but we can actually turn off target, and now it's no longer trying to get to that center point. So now if I were to grab, say, this red handle and move it off to the side, you see it's not rotating, it's just moving. So that's a nice, clean way of just getting basic movement, kind of like a classic Cinema 4D light, where you can really easily move this, change it however we want. But at any point, I can click back on the light and say, you know what, I want to target again. And now it's targeting right back to the middle. And that's all working well, but we can go ahead and do something like target an object. So I'm going to click on this little arrow. We can click on our nice little monster guy here. And now it is targeting that monster. So I can grab that monster and I can move him up into the air. And you see the light is automatically adapting to aim wherever it is. I can undo. And as another targeting option, we can go ahead and clear that out, and you can always hit this create button and that'll create a null right where that target already is. And now you can kind of independently move that around without moving your object. And you'll see that's automatically named whatever your softbox is. One thing I should note is the name is pretty cool and it's adaptive. I don't know. Let's say this is a softbox right. I'm going to name it right just so I know it's the one that's on the right. But if I change my light to these other types, let's say an umbrella, it's going to find kind of the keyword here being softbox and replace that with umbrella. So you don't need to lose your custom naming, but it will still adapt to it. If you completely override it with a custom name, it'll just remain your custom name. But now I can rename that and it's going to be softbox right all the time, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so we got all those controls. We got our targeting, which we can turn on and off, rotate, scale. Next up is the softbox tab. Now, this actually is the settings for each individual light. The softbox has the most settings, but different lights will have different ones. For instance, if we click on the umbrella, then we're going to get settings for the umbrella, let's say radius, and the offset. So how far in or out is this light? So we pull that in and out. And we can also change the fabric to different types of material like metallic, and we have the gradients we control. But let's jump back to our softbox and talk about those because these are the most interesting. So we got a nice big giant softbox going on right now. We can individually control the height and width, and we can control our corners. And in fact, actually something really cool that I should talk about before we do that is let's go ahead and move our light over a little bit. T for scale, scale it down, is we have our handles here, and something that might be nice. I'm going to temporarily turn off the IPR, and let's set this back to the viewport. I'm sorry, standard physical for the renderer, because now we can see it really nicely in the viewport. And I want to point out that we have some controls here that we can drag. We've got handles built in now. So we can drag this handle up and down and we can see the brightness changing. Now, of course, things like the Redshift and Octane and whatnot, they have their IPRs and their render views. So you're expected to be running that. And the viewport itself tends not to look very good. But meanwhile, standard and physical looks really good in Cinema 4D viewport. So this is going to give you some nice feedback as far as that's concerned. But you can control the height. We can control the width. And then we can control the rounding. And we've also got this nice fancy setting here, which is a soft edge. And you can see that translating here as well. These other lights are casting light on it, but that's actually a nice fade off on it. Let's go ahead and shift this back to Redshift so that we can take a look at it again. Let's open up our render view and reinitialize it. And take a look at some of these settings via their sliders. So here's a soft edge. You can see as I pull this in, we're actually fading that edge in. It's a really nice additional control that we didn't used to have. Next up, we have our rounding, which is just how round it is. So very square, round, but we have our different corner types. So I could say I want a hard edged one. And now as I pull this in, you're going to see that's actually kind of these 45-degree angles cutting in. And we can change it to rounded, and it's going to be perfect round bevels, very clean, kind of a classic kind of rounding there. But then we've got our new setting, which is soft, which is pretty cool. And it just gives you these nice soft edges on the edge where everything kind of tilts in just that little bit. Really like the way that looks. Next up, we've got the number of sides for our object. So in the past, softboxes we always had as 4 sides, but we can go ahead and change that up to 5 sides. You see it turns into a radius from there. I don't really see 5-sided softboxes, but maybe 6-sided isn't too weird, but definitely 8. That's one that we see. And even these still have their parametric rounding. We can round these out. It still has a soft edge. We can pull those in. We can round those out a little bit. Get nice soft boxes. So we've kind of got an arbitrary number of edges here. I think we can shoot up to like near 100. And interestingly, if you drag your slider, which is in the reasonable range of 10 to 4, you can even drop it down 1 and get to a triangle 1. So, the math allowed it. So we're like, why not? Let's leave it in there. Anyway, we can go back to 4. Next up, we've got our imperfection slider, so we can kind of mess up our surface or make it really clean, crank that up all the way, make it really messed up. Next up, we have our gradient and the different types of gradients, the way they're kind of overall applied. So we can go ahead and change our color here. In fact, why don't we leave that one white? And I'm going to get rid of our soft edge, but let's go ahead and change this to something red colored. And now we're going to see a red falling off to white. This mostly helps with reflection, but what's really cool in addition is we can change our type to, let's say, V. So now we got a gradient going from left to right. We could right click and invert our knots. Now it's going to go the other direction. Depending on the renderer, it'll show different types here because not all renderers have all types. In fact, Redshift doesn't have a box type, so that's not here. But in addition to using this gradient, we can also use our soft edge and we can fade out on top of the gradient. So those two kind of combine in really interesting ways. Okay, and so that's a type and gradient. Next up is shadow options. Standard physical actually has the most options because all the other ones just kind of do lights for real, where standard physical is faking it a little bit more. So we've got our area lights, we've got soft, hard, and then different densities. You'll see when I shift this over to Redshift that we only have 2 settings. Are there shadows and what's the density of them? Different renderers have different settings there. Moving on, I guess we're done with this tab, so we can jump on over into the Mount tab. So this one is pretty straightforward. We can change our different mount types. So right now we're on the floor. We can click it back into the ceiling. We can drag it up into the air. We can grab these different handles and change kind of the scale of them to adapt to our scene, depending on how we want that to look. There's a couple of pretty cool features here. You'll see if I zoom out, if I start pulling this upward, it's going to stretch, but at a certain point, it stretches beyond the point it wants to, and it's going to start creating additional segments. And then those can animate up and down nice and cleanly. If I were to drag this down to the point where they can't all fit, it's going to start erasing them out automatically and then drawing it back again. So it's kind of automatically adaptive there. Now, you probably noticed, and then these settings are all just kind of linking with that. The only one that's not directly controlled here would be our segments. So we can add in extra segments if we need extra segments for there. Also, we've got our maximum, just in case you dragged it really far or shrunk the light really tiny. We don't want it to suddenly have an overwhelming amount where it slows down so much. So we've clamped it at 100, but you can increase the amount. And then you've probably seen that as I'm moving my light around, that mount is disappearing. The stand or the ceiling mount disappears. And that's just because we are generating all of this geometry every refresh that you're moving it around, and we didn't want it to slow down if it didn't have to. But let's say you're doing an animation and you want to see those moving around. You can go ahead and turn off hide while moving, and now you'll see it's automatically moving around. Now I got a nice fast system here, and this is one light, a very simple scene, so it's very light. You can see I'm moving around. But if you were to grab 10 lights at the same time, you might get some slowdown because this is generating lots of geometry. It's generating light. It's generating materials. There's a lot going on. So keep that in mind as you're moving this stuff around. Okay, so that one is done. We can go ahead and jump into our advanced tab now. We got some different things to talk about in this one for sure. First of all, let's go back and actually let's solo a different light and let's just play with a different one. So now we've got a ring light here. It's nice and close to our monster. Zoom up a little bit and let's look at some additional settings. So if we go to advanced, something you'll see is that, we've got a plugin here, but we're locking away a lot of the objects. This object has materials. It has a light inside it that's casting the cast light. And we didn't want to hide that away in case there's like power users that have a setting that they want to go change and that we're not giving you access to. So you can click on the expose light checkbox, and whatever renderer you're currently in, it's going to expose your light. So no longer is it inside the plugin, it's been pulled out and made a child. So it's automatically linked up here, but now you can click on the actual light and go and change settings. So maybe you want it to be bidirectional, or maybe you want to turn on some sort of glow, or you want it to be seen in the specular. You can go ahead and change those individually in the light. But I don't want to do that, so I'm going to unexpose the light. Next up is diffuse light, which is kind of the cast light. If I turn that off, the only thing that's being cast is the reflection. And then if you're in standard physical, we also have the GI light, which is going to be turning on, the ability for it to be casting GI or not. But anyway, back to redshift. We go back to advanced. So this one is important. We've got different geometry types. I'm actually going to create a sky so we can kind of see. Hopefully that shows up in the background. I'm not sure if redshift will acknowledge it. Let's just give it a second to process. Doesn't seem to. Maybe if we throw... No, it doesn't seem to like it at all. So never mind on that. I want to just kind of see our light a little bit better. But instead we'll just spin around so it's kind of behind the monster. So next up, we've got our geometry, our actual geometry. So if we go into our viewport, this is what's actually there. You remember in our light, in our viewport mode, it was changing the way it looked, but it still rendered the same. But if we go to our advanced and go to our geometry, I can actually say, you know what? I only want to see the surface of the light. So it is now no longer generating a mount. It's no longer generating the extra geometry. And depending on the light that you're in, you can see that let's say the softbox is just the surface of the softbox. The other geometry is not existing and it will not render. So maybe there's a lot of power users out there who are like, you know what? I don't need these bells and whistles. I just want my cast light and the reflection. So that's a great mode to switch it to. We've also got the simplest one, which is cast light. So now we don't even have the reflection. We just have the actual light there ready to cast. So the most minimal, the least intensive in your viewport. But for the most part, I like keeping everything on. Next up, we have our compositing settings, really quick compositing tag type stuff. So we're going to skip over the first one and go to scene by camera. I can turn that off and you'll see our monster here doesn't look any different if we turn it on or off, but it itself is no longer seen in the viewport. Next up, we have scene by transparency, pretty self-explanatory. Will the light be seen behind glass? Seen by reflection, will it be seen in reflections? And then geo shadow is, should the geometry of the light itself cast a shadow? So if we had a different light here casting light, this light would cast a shadow on the floor. So you can turn that off as well. So as long as we're in compositing, let's talk about this expose tag. Just like the exposed light, we want you to have full access to compositing tags when you need them. Now, each renderer has its own compositing tag. Different renderers have different settings. So Octane, for instance, doesn't have scene by transparency or reflection or geometry shadow. So those don't show up. But if you wanted to put on, let's say, a custom object buffer or something, in which case I'm going to go back to standard physical just so we can see that. If I click on expose tag, it's actually going to turn off visibility compositing. And instead of us having internal compositing tags, we now have an external compositing tag. So you can go ahead and turn on whichever settings you want, turn on the object buffer. That's ready to rock. And you can, once again, customize even deeper if you need to. But in this instance, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to delete it. I'm going to go back into my light and I'm going to turn on our ability to customize them. And I guess we'll go back to Redshift. Lastly, here we have our studio color. Should the icon automatically adapt to the color of the studio? I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that, because this is great feedback right there in the viewport. And then we've also got our studio, or the icon color. If you want to customize it for some reason, you can click on this and make it a crazy green color, and you're going to see it's going to turn green. If you want to go back to normal, you just crank it back to white, and it's going to adapt to whatever color it is. And we've got our final setting here, which is under project. So under here, we can go ahead and feed objects in. So for instance, let's go ahead and make a character right there. And let's also apply that same Redshift material to them. So now under our softbox, I could be like, you know what? I don't want that guy to be seen by these different settings, and those will turn off. His reflection is still being seen. But we can go ahead and exclude objects and include objects via that setting. So yeah, include, exclude, and we can turn on the shadow or the reflection or the specular, or I guess not specular, just be reflection and cast light. And turn off the shadow independently on them, as long as the renderer is actually capable of that. So I think that pretty much covers everything involved in the basics of the light. Remember, you can go ahead and click on any given light. You can change it to all different modes. You can click on the different modes here. If you want to create new lights, you can click on the menu and grab any of them from default here. And also the studio object can create lights, but we're going to talk about the studio object in the next video. So I think that will wrap this one up, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Hello there, and welcome to the continued training for LightKit Pro 3. In this video, we are going to be talking about the Cyc Object. It's just a good way of thinking about a background object for whatever you might be lighting. So you can get to it by clicking on our Cyc backdrop here, and of course you can get to it from the plugin menu and see all the different types. So we can go ahead and click on any one of these. What's great about the Cyc is it enables you to create seamless transitions from a floor to the background. For examples of that, you can go ahead and pop open the LightKit browser and scroll through here, and you're going to be able to see like different nice super smooth transitions and other ones with different lighting where you can see separation between the two, and some where the Cyc even seems to almost disappear behind it. In any case, let's look at the object itself. This is a parametric object ready to be used. We can go ahead and turn on our polygons, so hitting NB, I pop that open, you can see the transition that we have in here. Now we have a whole bunch of different settings that you can control via these handles. You can go ahead and grab a handle, change the width, change the height, change the radius, change the depth, and of course you can jump in to the type and you can cycle through the S curve, additional settings there, and you can jump to the C curve, which gives you some nice overhead bounce, so lights will bounce off the ceiling, cast back down, half pipe, both sides, the corner cove, which exists at a 45-degree angle. That one's pretty nifty. And we've got corner cove, so you kind of got a back, left, and right wall. Once again, parametric radiuses, so we can change these. And then we've got our dome, if you want to be completely surrounded. We've also got the half dome, chop it off half over on the back. And the last one being the cylinder stand, so it's actually kind of going downward, and it becomes more of a platform in which you can rest things on top of it. So I've been changing the radius here. On the depth, you can go and make yourself a nice little pedestal here ready to rock and change exactly how you want to lay something out on top of that. Really good for combining with other Cycs. For instance, we can go ahead and create an S-curve on top of that. We'll grab our S-curve, pull it down, and now we've got somebody up on a platform and the overall background. Now, as far as specific additional settings are concerned, all these parameters are shared when they can be between Cycs, but we've got different radiuses depending on which ones we grab. Most of the time, we're just grabbing these dots. But you can go ahead and change your radius 1 up top and your radius 2 on the bottom. We've got an orientation. Now, typically Cinema 4D is designed to look good from, or it's designed so you're kind of looking down the Z axis. But right now, so we've got orientation defaulting that direction. We can always change it to X to be changing that. Now, Y doesn't make any sense on that, so it doesn't exist here. But on some of them, it would. And we've got something like the corner. And you can face that here, and you'll see that our object is still parametrically facing kind of, the axis is facing forward, but it's built at a 45-degree angle, so that kind of thing is pretty neat. We've also got the ability to change where your object is pivoting from. So we can change the pivot from the center point right here. We could change that to the front, and now it's going to pivot straight from the front. So as we manipulate the dots and move it around, it's going to go further back. That can definitely be handy. And we can pivot from the back, so now we can pull this forward from there. Typically, center is pretty useful, though. And then we've got our subdivision, so we can add subdivisions to, if you wanted to add additional, let's say, curvature to your object and be bending it with a bend deformer, say, you might need additional geometry, so that's what these settings are there for. Lastly, we've also got the Cyc Materials tab, and depending on which renderer you're in, you can click and create a material for that particular renderer. It's just a nice basic like 80% white dull material. So in standard physical, we can just click that and boom, we've added a Cyc white material. It's automatically applied. And if you were to say switch your renderer and you're using your Cyc, it's easy enough to just delete that material off and say, you know what, instead I want an Arnold material. And now an Arnold material has been created and applied to your object. And of course, it's free to be manipulated and you can update it and change the color. So that is the Cyc object. It is hopefully pretty straightforward. It is built into most of the presets inside of the browser. And that should wrap this one up. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Hello there, and welcome back to the LightKit Pro 3 training video series. In this video, we're going to be talking about the LightKit Studio object. Now, I've got a pretty clean basic scene here. I've got a bunch of different lights ready to light up. I've got a couple of different Cycs where it's got a pedestal and this backdrop, and I've got the model of a monster. I've got the scene set up for redshift. All of these lights are currently in the redshift render mode. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. This could just as easily be one of the other renderers. I'm going to pop it open. Let's hit play. It's going to have to initialize, loading a bunch of geometry and feeding the initial pass of the shaders. But there we go. We are now interactively able to take a look at what we've got here. Now, important thing to note that I haven't mentioned yet is that LightKit was designed to look really, all of our previews, all of our looks, everything's got GI turned on. So we've got 5 bounces of GI. In Redshift, we got 5 bounces. I got the settings cranked up a little bit, but that is ready to rock right there with 5 bounces. So let's talk about the LightKit Studio object. So let's go ahead and click on our drop down here, the one with the lights, and we can click on the LightKit Studio object, and it just goes ahead and creates that. And by itself, it's only got a handful of parameters. But what you're going to want to do with your LightKit Studio is grab any lights that you've created and drop them as a child of it. It's kind of a null to store all of your lights. But now that I've done that, let's go ahead and just put our IPR up here to be viewing it directly. Now we've got that, we've got a couple of controls that we can do. First of all, we can load the browser directly from it. And another thing that's useful is you can go ahead and double click the LightKit Studio, and that will actually pop open the browser for quick access to that if you're swapping between different studios. Next up, we've got the renderer. So we can actually change what renderer we're running through all of these lights, all the children lights, just by changing this parent. In fact, if you click on one of these lights, you'll see it's grayed out now because it's being controlled by the parent light. Now, the first setting we get is a global scale. This can be incredibly useful if your scene is built at a different size. Let's say, in fact, why don't we go ahead and even put these 2 Cycs as children of it, because it's designed to work with that. Let's say that we had our little monster fella, and he's very high poly. I'm going to hit T for scale, and we're going to make him pretty big. No, I should probably stop the IPR while I'm scaling. All right, there we go. We got this big old monster guy. He's too big for what we have set up. We can just go ahead to our LightKit Studio, and I can click our global scale, and I can start dragging it up, and everything is going to uniformly scale up, and the lighting will be maintained. The lighting will not be changing at all. In fact, we could have left that on, but the lighting will not change at all. It's just going to scale and adapt to the size of your scene as you scale it up or down. In addition to that, we've now got a global intensity. So all the lights that are children, we can increase the overall brightness of all of those lights and really start cranking up that overall brightness, blow it out a little too much there if we want, but just a little extra brightness, that can go a long way. In addition to that, we have our temperature. So we could, whoa, So we could go ahead and grab our temperature, and it's kind of on a warm, cool Kelvin type scale. We can go ahead and start pulling this down. So pull it down, you see it's going to get warmer and warmer, and we can pull it up and tint everything into the cool range and make it a little bit cooler. So these are great things to tweak when you're playing with one of our built-in presets. You're like, you know what, that's great, but I want it just a little bit warmer and I want it a little bit brighter. In addition to that, we also have a global tint. So instead of making it warmer or cooler, let's say you want to push it maybe a little bit into the green range. That will also multiply on top of the final colored lights. Another thing that's cool is you'll see as I was changing this temperature and the tint, our icons are changing to reflect it. These lights have actually turned into these particular colors. So we go ahead and add in some extra blue here, and you're going to see all those change. Of course, we're multiplying that color, so we got to brighten it up a little bit more, make that brighter, and now we've got a completely different look there. The next setting would be the ceiling height. That would be us showing, that would be kind of globally changing the height of these stands. So right now it's kind of set universally, but I can click it override and set it to an absolute amount. Let's go ahead and change this over to like 2000. And you're going to see it jump up to that other height. This is quite a large scene now, so let's go ahead with a very big number. And you can see it's overriding all those and jumping to a new height. Lastly, here we've got adapt brightness to scale. And like I said, as I was scaling the scene, it was not changing the lighting. It kind of looked exactly the same as it got bigger and smaller. If you turn that off, the lighting will get brighter as it scales up. So typically I would never turn that off, but it's pretty useful if you need it. And then we just have another shortcut here to create additional lights. If I want another softbox, I can click on that, and I've got a new softbox ready to be changed and manipulated however I want. And we can make it a child of the Light Kit Studio, and it is completely ready to rock and contribute to the overall scene. Now, there is a lot more to talk about with the Light Kit Studio object in regards to saving out presets. And we're going to cover this in the browser video and the preset creation video. But I think it's important to note that I can go ahead and close this down, and we can go ahead and open up our browser. And a very important feature in this version of Light Kit is the ability for you to create presets that you're going to save into the browser. And those will be stored into the user menu. Now, the way this works, in fact, it will tell you exactly how it works, is if I click Save Studio, it's going to pop up with this message telling you everything I'm about to tell you. And that is when it's saving a studio, it's going to save a file, and that file is only going to save the things that are a child of the Light Kit Studio object. So this monster isn't in that Light Kit Studio, so that won't be saved. So if you're making your own, let's say a really nice lighting preset for a product you're working on, you don't want to save the bottle or the can inside the preset, because now every time you go to use that preset, that bottle is going to load in. So you can leave that outside of the Light Kit Studio. Also, it's going to adapt to be 16:9, and the current settings will be saved in whatever your current render settings are. Those are what are going to be used. So I can go ahead and say, yes, I want to use this. And whatever my current point of view is, whatever my current render settings are, that's what's going to be used. So I'm going to just call this Cool Monster. Hit OK, and my current render settings are going to run and render a thumbnail. And if I've got the 5 bounces and my settings cranked up pretty high, so that might take a second to calculate. But yeah, there we go, it's done. And if we go and click, the current POV I was sitting at is what is going to be rendered, which actually isn't that good. So it'd probably be better to zoom way up on our little monster fella here. And actually, there's a fine thing to mention for making this mistake. I can just right click and delete my user studio and then save the studio again and go ahead and call it Cool Monster. Boom. And now we're going to let that one chug along for a second, hopefully create a nice thumbnail for us on our overall monster guy as soon as this rendering thumbnail pops up. Boop, that's done. And then boom, our cool monster. I seem like I've got my camera in a way where I'm cropping that off because I didn't do it, but nice 16:9 crop off, and that is ready to load. Now, well, once again, with the studio object, we use this in a lot of different ways when it's involved in the browser. If I were to jump to these pop studios, I can go ahead and double click on the Candy Studio. And what it's going to do is find my existing studio. Remember, we scaled our studio up? It is actually finding the scaled up studio and replacing it with its position, scale, and rotation. So we've adapted to this object. We only had to do that one time. So just to make it even a little bit more blatant if we wanted to, I could go ahead and grab our overall studio, which we already scaled up, and I can move it off to the side and I can rotate it. And now we could go ahead and, our monster's not there anymore, but a new monster is going to load in with it anyway. I can go ahead and double click on something like Portrait 4, and you're going to see without me changing my camera here that that has now appeared in that position right at that 0, 0, 0, and everything's adapted to that scale, that position, that rotation. Very important, and that's based off of it looking for your studio object. Now, just a couple additional clarifications here. If you click on your Settings tab, then you're going to see that we have a couple different settings in here that are pretty important. One is that we can override the current studio, and that's currently on, and that's important. But let's say you wanted to be able to keyframe one studio and another. If we turn that off and double click to make an additional studio, then it's actually just going to ignore the current one and just make a second studio in an unrelated location back at 0. In addition to that, when we're loading these in, it's also loading the stands, loading the cyc, and it's automatically linking to the camera. That if we put a camera inside of the studio object and we save it, the camera will automatically link to that. And it's automatically loading this monster character in. So because we have that load model and we have whichever setting we want in there. So I could turn it to spheres and spheres will load. Otherwise, I typically keep all these checkboxes on, but that will create a second studio and the other one will automatically be turned off. So I think that should pretty much cover everything involved in the Light Kit Studio object, a really handy way of controlling all the lights that are a child and a quick way of your browser being able to adapt to your scene without you having to reposition, rescale, and re-rotate your lights every single time you just try a different preset. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Hello again, welcome back to the Light Kit Pro 3 training series. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Light Kit browser. That is one of the best new features that we have in this new version of Light Kit, is being able to very quickly go and save and load studios to quickly kind of iterate through different lighting looks. So 3 different ways of getting to the Light Kit browser. One, you can click on our nice little palette that we loaded and click on Light Kit browser. You can go to your plugin dropdown, of course, go to Light Kit Pro and Light Kit browser. And also, if you already have a studio loaded, let's say we already had a studio and a light, and we've talked about this in the other videos, but you can double click on the icon of the studio object and that will also open up our browser. So let's just do this from scratch. I'm gonna hit delete. So the basics are, of course, you can just go ahead and start double clicking and loading in different presets. So I could go ahead and double click on dark and stormy and boom, right away it's going to load in dark and stormy into our scene. It is ready to rock. It loaded it in at standard and physical because the browser automatically detected our render settings were actually, let me go ahead and pop open our render settings. You can see it's already set to standard. So it knew to pop it open in that. So we could change that if we want to, but the next cool thing here is you see we've got some spheres already loaded. We got all the lights. We got cycs loaded. We've got a camera. It automatically linked to that camera. There's a little README that's reminding you that if you want it to look just like our icon, that you want to set GI bounces to 5. So the next thing is we already got a studio loaded here, but we can go ahead and double click on something like basic teal and orange, and it's going to replace our existing one. So it got rid of the previous one and is now currently loaded this new one in. And you see we're getting some nice reflections right away, kind of representing what those are going to look like. And this is unrendered. Now, the next thing to talk about is the fact that, yes, indeed, when you double click on any of these, it's going to replace the current one and everything that is a child of it. So let's say that we wanted to, let's say we have our own special model loaded. So I don't have anything prepared specifically. So let's create a figure. I'm going to scale that down. So you see we had these spheres. We actually don't need those. So I could just load them that way and hit delete. And then it's okay, those will go away. But under our settings, we actually have auto load model. So whenever we double click a studio, it's loading the model in again. So that's pretty handy if you want to kind of quickly find a cool type of lighting. But if you already got a model, you already know what you want it to look like, you can turn that off. And now a model will not be loaded. So I could go ahead and double click on cold as ice, and that should go ahead and replace this. But you see our figure was not replaced. So we're going to go over all these settings in more specificity in a second, but I just want to kind of quickly show how you could go and load up studios very rapidly and not be destructive in your scene. So let's go through these a little bit more methodically now. So first up, our first setting here is our search. So we could, let's say we want to find all of our teal and oranges. I could search for the word teal, hit enter or the word search, and anything that's got the word teal in it are going to pop up. So cool. We can go ahead and clear that, or we can just click on a different tab and it's going to erase that back out again, or kind of any refresh, and it'll go back to showing all of them. Now we've got different tabs in here. If you've got the full bundle, then you're going to have the Essential tab, the Pop tab, and the Product tab. In addition to that, we have a User tab, and right now there's going to be 2 in there from me making them, but this will be empty for you right now. And of course, we have the All tab, which is going to show all of the ones that you currently have installed. Next up, we have our Save Studio. We'll talk about that at the end. We have the current renderer, which we'll talk about in a second. We've got our scale, so we can go ahead and change our icons to be really tiny or really big. And so we can just, have that look however we want. It will remember these settings when you close and open your browser or even close and open Cinema 4D. You have a question mark button, which of course will pop open to this training page that you're probably currently watching. And that should cover the basics of the main tab. So now let's jump into this renderer setting. So in the renderer setting, it is going to automatically set this renderer dynamically to whatever your current, and let's go ahead and do this kind of from scratch. It's going to automatically set that to whatever your current render settings are set at. So you see right now I'm on standard. So standard or physical will load that way. But let's go ahead and turn out something like Arnold. And you'll see when I pop open my browser, that has automatically jumped to Arnold. So I could go ahead and go to a preset. Let's grab Citrus Sunset. Double click on that. It's going to pop into the scene, ready to go. And you'll see that it already loaded in as Arnold. All of our lights are set to Arnold. So really straightforward. But if we were to go ahead and change our render setting to say Redshift, then when we jump back into our browser, and once again, you can double click on the icon to pop it open. This is going to say Pick Renderer because it found a conflict between the studio object that you had and the current render settings that you have. So you just got to go ahead and say, pick your renderer. If you don't pick it and you double click one, it's going to be like, hey, pick your renderer. So in this case, we'd be like, oh, well, we switched to Redshift. So I want to load a Redshift one. So now we can go ahead and scroll and grab something like Neo Noir, and it's going to replace that. And you see that has loaded as Redshift. So just to be clear, that's a really nifty way of making sure you've got the correct renderer, and it automatically loads in as the correct one. Now, moving on, we can jump to our settings. So in here, we tried to make this as clean as possible. We'll talk about the save user path in a second. We can ignore that for now. What we want to do, and by default, these are all on. So we've got all these checkboxes turned on, and these are kind of preferences that will be remembered even when you close the browser, even when we start Cinema. So the first checkbox is override current studio. So what's great about that is if you're doing your lighting, you see our figure is outside of our entire hierarchy. So that's not affected at all, but we can go through and be like dungeon rim light and everything gets replaced. Cool. And I turned that back on again. So the spheres got created. I'm gonna hit delete. So it is replacing the current studio. But if I were to turn off Override Studio and we go pick a different one, let's try Passion Fruit, then you're going to see it's going to actually create a brand new, an entirely new studio, and it's going to just turn off the checkboxes of the other one. So it's a way of not destroying your studio. And let's say you're going to like transition from one lighting scheme to another. You can just animate these dots turning, your checkboxes turning on, enabling it. So that's just the first setting. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And I guess we can turn all those back on again. And then let's go back to our settings and move on forward. So next up is load stands. A lot of presets might be created using stands. You can see even this preset, there are stands going up into the air. If you want those to be turned off by default as you load a studio, because it's like, okay, I don't need that. It's just eye candy and it's not important. It's going to, I don't need it slowing down my scene at all and creating extra unnecessary geometry. Turn off load stands. And now when you load in something, in fact, we just load in the same dungeon light, it's going to be created, and you'll see when I zoom out that those stands were not turned on. Cool. Next up, we've got loading cycs. Even in the same preset, let's go ahead and turn off load cyc. Let's go to any of these that has a preset. And let's go ahead and double click on Warm with Halo. And you'll see that even though this is showing a backdrop, it's showing a cyc, it was loaded without one. So that's what that setting does. Next up is auto link the studio camera. All of our presets have a camera already in there, kind of a nice perfectly frontal one. And this is going to automatically link to the POV of that camera. But let's say I move off to this other angle and let's go and load a different one. Let's grab this backlight with key left. You're going to see that all the other ones, we're jumping to the POV, but on this one, we did not jump to the POV. In fact, I should probably turn that off so that it actually does it. Also, I do want it to override the current stand. I've just been piling these up. I didn't even realize. Whoops. So let's go ahead and I guess it'd be good to turn these back on as we go. So we don't want to auto link. So you see we're from this interesting point of view, the side angle, and you see now we didn't link to the camera. Boom, really straightforward. That's what that one does. Auto load README. This one's pretty straightforward. There's this README that gets created, and it's telling you this little note about doing your GIs. If you don't want it, you can tell it not to load that anymore. Next up is the studio, or the warning when saving studio. So right now you click Save Studio, it's going to pop open a warning. That will turn that off so it doesn't pop up every time. We'll see that when we get there. Next up is Auto Load Model. So we've actually got that turned on right now, and you'll see it every time I'm clicking, it's automatically creating this sphere model. But if you just are using the lighting, you always just leave that turned off and it won't load in anymore, because we want to load in our figure, or we've got a figure, so we just want it from there. So if I were to, once again, let's double click on like Cuban Dawn, and now you see our models there, but there's not big spheres in the way. But you could leave that turned on. Let's say we didn't have this figure in there, and not only can we load spheres, but we can also load, let's say, the coffee maker. I can go ahead and load in a new studio. Let's try gamma rays. These nice vibrant ones have interesting colors. So it's going to load into this coffee maker. We could also, in our settings, load in our monster model, and he's just really fun to look at. So we go to products, and let's go to product teal and orange, and then it's going to load in our monster guy right into the viewport. So that is all completely ready to rock, really straightforward. And let's just say you did want to do a test and you had that turned off, or you're, let's say, recording a preset, you're making your own studio, and you want to, let's say, have the spheres in there just like we do. You could always just say place model, and then boom, the spheres are going to appear into your scene. You just make it Shiloh there, and now that's ready to rock. So that is covering all those basic buttons. Now, before we get into saving our own custom studios, let's talk about these light default settings. We thought this was important. We thought that there might be some power users out there who they want to be able to work really quickly. And when you're loading in a light kit light, let's say when you create a light kit light by default, you're going to see that it's got all of the geometry. It's also got the ceiling stand going. But let's say you don't like the ceiling stands. You want to load with the ground stands. So you could always manually change it in your light every time you go, okay, I want a floor-based mount. But instead, we could say, I'm going to set that to floor, or I'm sorry, I'm going to set that back up to the ceiling. We could say that when a light is loaded, the light default, I want it to be based on the floor. So now you'll see if I delete that light and load a brand new one in, that's automatically a floor stand. But you could also set it to none. So now if I were to click on an umbrella, you see it's loading in and there is no stand at all. Just a quick way of keeping that a little cleaner, a little lighter in your scene. The same thing goes with the default geometry. So we talked about this in the light video, but any given object you can change its geometry from the fixture and stand to just the light surface. So you see even simplified, more simplified, and then the cast light, which has no geometry whatsoever. So mainly it's for light surface. If you were to change this to be full geometry to just the light surface, it is now a very clean, straightforward mode for maybe power users who are just like, nope, I just want the lighting. I don't need the bells and whistles. So you just click on a softbox here, and you'll see it's just going to load in as this flat plate instead of having the stand, instead of having the box and the light. So it's still ready to rock. It still has all the relevant settings, but it is ready to go along those lines. So let's go ahead and pop open our browser one more time and talk about making our own studio. So we've got to be a little bit specific with the way we do this. It's very important, and you'll see when you click Save Studio that it's going to have a whole bunch of warnings. But I'm just going to walk you through the entire process right now. In fact, instead of building one from scratch, why don't we go and find a studio that we like the look of, and we'll just modify it. So here's one. Let's grab a Neo Tokyo. It's going to load in as a redshift render. Double click that. Boom. It's going to load it in. It loaded the spheres, and we made all of our presets with the spheres. So if you want to match our look, then this is a great way to do it because it's already got the camera. It's already got the spheres. It's ready to rock. So I'm going to go ahead and let's walk through this. First of all, we don't need the README. That shouldn't be saved inside of it. And I'm going to go ahead and pull our spheres out because we don't want the spheres being saved. The important thing to note is when you're saving a studio, anything that is a child of the LightKit Studio object is going to be saved. So it's going to save the camera. If we had the spheres in there, it's going to save the spheres. But right now, the browser dynamically loads the spheres automatically. So we don't need to add that in. It's already doing it. So we don't need that part. But we do want them there for the render. So because we've got that, why don't we go ahead and grab this light and let's go ahead and maybe make it blue. We've got redshift turned on, so why don't we go ahead and go into our render settings. I'm going to go ahead and turn on redshift. In fact, I don't know if this loaded as redshift. Okay, it did. I'm going to load redshift in as the renderer, and I'm going to crank up my samples really high. I'm going to GI. I'm going to turn on brute force, and let's do an irradiance. And I'm going to do 5 bounces. So those are kind of the settings that all of the presets were made in different renderers, in fact. Some of them were made in Physical, some of them were made in Arnold, some of them were made in Redshift. But all of them, we made sure to have 5 bounces of GI. So if you want to kind of match our style, 5 bounces of GI is what you want to do to have it look exactly the same. So now that we've got our render settings going, we can go ahead and continue here. Now, I mean, I'm going to go through really specifically about the way you can do a very clean setup in here, but you actually don't have to be as meticulous with this. For one, any materials that you have applied to objects in there are also going to be saved. Now, if you're always in Redshift, you don't care. You can just save it and there's Redshift materials and they'll load in, ready to rock completely for you. But if you want to kind of dynamically adapt to the browser, like with the way we built it, what you can actually do is not have any materials applied in here. And I'm going to actually put my studio object into a group. I'm going to hit Alt-G, and I'm going to take this one material that's a child that's attached to our studio, and I'm actually going to move it up a layer, and that layer is now filtering those materials down so they'll still render correctly, but it's not going to be applied when we load them in manually. It'll automatically load in, let's say we're in Octane, it'll load in the Octane materials, but that won't happen if you put your own materials on there. Anyway, we have now set this up. Let's go ahead and turn on our Redshift render view, or whichever renderer you're using. I'm going to turn that on. It's going to initialize. Cool, looking really good. And now we can just go ahead and tweak our lighting. Let's go ahead and make this maybe a bright pink. And let's say I want it to be very reflective over there. And that's actually looking pretty cool already. But let's go and shift this maybe a little bit into the purple. And maybe I want that one to be an umbrella. So actually, no, I don't want that one to be an umbrella. I want the blue one to be an umbrella. So there, now we got a nice little umbrella there. We can even pull it closer so you can see it. Don't go that close. But there we go, a nice big umbrella there. So it's like, cool, that's our new preset. That's what we want this to look like. And once again, we're working from our previous preset, so it's going to look very similar to the way we set all of ours up. So let's go ahead and double click, pop open our browser, and now all we have to do is click Save Studio. Click Save Studio. A warning is going to pop up, which you can turn off in the settings, and it's telling you pretty much the things I just explained. Only children of the LightKit Studio object are going to be saved. It's going to use our current render settings. It's going to use our current render settings, but it's going to set it to 16:9. And the settings inside of the studio object here are not going to be saved. So if you change your global scale or your global intensity or temperature, those don't get saved because those are being controlled by the user after it's loaded. So we go ahead and say yes. And now we give our studio a name. And I'm going to call it Neo. I don't forget what this one was called. Oh, yeah, it's Neon Tokyo number 2. And I'll just hit OK. And it's going to write down here, you see it says rendering thumbnail. So it's currently processing the thumbnail. If you have long render settings, that will take longer. If they're low render settings, it'll be quicker. But if I click on my user tab, you see I now have a Neon Tokyo 2 rendered just like all the rest of ours were. This is the process we use to create all these presets. It is saved. It is there. If we scroll down, we're going to see at the bottom of the list, it is available to be searched. If I search for Neon, then you're going to see it appear in that list. So it's completely ready to rock, super useful to just merge and create your own studios whenever you make a tweak. And, you know, even that, I started from that, I made that. And in some ways, I kind of like this one better. But yeah, really quick way to go through there. You just got to you want to be clean on the way you do the overall process. Now, in addition, I mean, and real quick, just to show as an example, we can go and just change something here. Let's jump that over to orange. Cool. So that should look, yeah, that's got a nice orange glow. In fact, that's quite nice. I like that. So we could just immediately be like, okay, cool. I'm going to save another one. Save Studio. And I'm going to just call that one Neon Tokyo 3. Hit OK. And boom, we've made another preset ready to rock. And boom. Go to user, and there it is. Got those two, really cool. And so now, I guess the point being is in my scene, I could go ahead and say, let's load our dark and stormy, and boom, dark and stormy is loaded. But I can go back to user. I'd be like, no, I want my Neon Tokyo 3. Double click that. Boom, that's loaded. And you're going to see, oh, it's actually currently replacing the current one. So let's just delete everything. just to be super clear, let's double click on Neon Tokyo, and you're going to see everything is loaded in from scratch. It manually added the spheres, but because we built this really clean, I could say, you know what, I want the monster to be loaded instead. And now when I double click that one, it's going to load in our monster instead of the spheres, and the monster has to initialize there, and boom, it loaded that in because we built it really clean. But like I said, if you want to save your object inside of there, if you want to have a different camera angle, if you want the camera angle to be zoomed way out so you can see all the different objects, you can do that. This is just if you want to kind of match our very clean way of doing it. Now, all of our presets are being saved into the main folder, or into like kind of your plugin folder, but the user presets are being saved into your local path. And you can get to that local path by clicking on settings and clicking open folder. If we widen that, we click open folder, and it's actually going to pop open the folder where these are being saved. So you'll see inside of my R19, inside plugins, there's a LightKit folder and a user folder. And you can see all of these are being saved inside there. There's the Cinema 4D file, and here are the thumbnails. So you could go ahead and let's say copy these over to somebody else. But I want to, before you do that, I want to show you something cool. If I wanted, let's say I went and made like 10 different Neon Tokyos. I want to make my Tokyo folder. I can right click and say rename, and let's call this Tokyo. And that's cool. And then that's done. Close that. Now, if I close down my browser and reopen it up again, then now I've got a Tokyo folder, and all of those have been moved in that folder. And then LightKit browser is smart, and it went and made a brand new user folder. So these are saved away. They're locked into that folder, ready to rock. But now you've got your own custom tab ready to be used. But you can click on your user folder and start creating and saving new studios. And in fact, why don't we just go ahead and, like, just for an example, let's move that monster out. And once again, that materials, actually, let's do it in the weird way. I'm going to put the monster in. Let's just look at it kind of the, I don't want to say wrong way, but the least dynamic way. We got that monster. Let's go ahead and just change one more light again, just to have it not be identical. Bright green. There we go. That looks kind of weird. Let's say save, and I can say yes, and we'll just call this monster 1 and hit OK. And it's going to render a thumbnail out, and you're going to see that this is going to appear inside of our user folder as soon as it finishes rendering our high poly monster guy. And boom, it appears. We got monster 1 and we got Tokyo. If we go to all, then we should see everything loaded up inside of there. But now, just to be clear, if I were to open up a new scene file, so we got a brand new scene file. If I load this monster 1, remember we didn't remove the materials and we left our monster in there. So you see the monster is being loaded, and you see the materials are doubled up on there. So that's what happens if you don't clean them up a little bit. And of course we didn't turn our GI on in this file. So if you were building your own, it would probably be a good idea to make sure that you don't automatically load our model in, and you have to make sure that your materials are not going to be conflicting. But that should pretty much cover that. The last two buttons we have in here is set path. If you want to be saving these to some other location and having it load from that other location, you could set this. Let's say that you have a whole team of people and you're all working off of Dropbox. You could be saving to that Dropbox folder, and it'd be syncing up to everybody, and reset to default so you can go back to your local folder if need be. Also keep in mind that you could be collecting these and putting that, if you're working on one machine, you could always go click on your open folder, and we can grab our Tokyo folder, and you could transfer that to a different machine inside of your LightKit folder right next to user. So hopefully very nimble, very quick for you to be able to send these to other people, have them be used, so a whole team could work on it. That, I think, will cover everything involved in the LightKit browser. Hopefully it's as fun for you to use as for us. Actually, oh my God, I completely forgot a giant feature, which is very actually important, and I'm a little sad I didn't put this at the beginning, because it's kind of important. I'm going to go back to this scene file where we kind of have it all set up with the render settings. And I want to show you for an example. Let's say that I'm going to get rid of this monster, but let's go ahead and make the figure again. And let's say you're working from a scene file, and it's, and you know, everything you make isn't going to be this scale. It's not going to be in this position. So let's say that our figure, you get something from a client and it's way over here and it's way over there, and the figure is super huge. So you get this big old thing. So when you load in a LightKit light setup here from the browser, it's going to be all tiny and right there. In fact, let's just go ahead and do it from scratch. Let's pop open the browser and say, I want this, let's grab something we haven't, big front warm back. So that's been loaded, and our camera's jumped to this position because it's still zeroed out. But if I delink from our camera, you see we're at this kind of 0, 0, 0 position. What's cool is we can go and grab our LightKit Studio object, hit the move tool, and I'm going to go ahead and move this over to the side. Let's go ahead and move it right to where his feet are. And now I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter T for scale and scale this entire thing up until it is matching our current figure in this position. And we could also add in rotation if we wanted to. In fact, why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm going to add in some rotation here. So now it's like, okay, cool. But you know what? I want to keep on iterating my looks. I could click on our camera here. I want to keep on it. Actually, yeah, I guess I'm going to shrink the figure a little bit. Actually, the whole point of this exercise is we're not doing that. So I'm going to actually hit T for scale and scale up everything except for the figure. Cool. So the figure is there in the center. Let's go ahead and double click, and we want to go ahead and look at some different looks. So once again, I'm not loading in a model right now. So let's go ahead to product, and let's go ahead and grab a nice silhouette. Let's grab our basic rim light here. Double click on that, and you're going to see that it has automatically jumped and updated and rotated and scaled to match to the figure. The figure is still that big giant size it was, but we've automatically adapted to that position. So now if we pop open our, in this case, Redshift renderer and activate it, then we have now adapted to this point of view, and it is ready to rock from over there. So I think that will wrap up everything about the browser, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye-bye. Hi there everyone, and welcome to another LightKit 3 training video. In this one, we're going to be talking about light navigation. And if you already watched the light video, this is already covered, but I just want to talk about light navigation as an isolated setup here. So let's go ahead and create a light and look at some different navigations. Now, something that's important to note right away is a difference from LightKit 2, and that is that the pivot of all previous versions of LightKit would pivot from the 0, 0, 0 location, but we've made it so that it's actually pivoting directly from the light. And that makes it very easy to see exactly where it is, and it also makes it very easy to move it around. Now you see, or right away, I can hit E for move and move my light around, and you'll see it's always constantly targeting this yellow X aimed right at 0, 0, 0. So right away, I feel like there's a very intuitive way of navigating your lights around and placing them pretty much exactly where you want to. But what's great is if you click on your light, we've got a size and placement tab. In fact, why don't we go ahead and isolate this down? So we're only seeing this one little setting here. So this is what we're focused on. You'll see as I move my light around that the distance, rotation, and pitch are all constantly changing. And what's great about that is we can at any point jump over here and continue moving our distance, or we can grab our rotation and we can spin around, or we can grab our pitch, go down to 0 level, or go 90 degrees overhead. And so it's very easy to continue your movement from one to the other, and they'll all just continue working. Now, in addition to that, we've also got a tilt, so we can tilt this from one side. We can also go negative if we like to, tilt it one way or the other. And we've got a scale. We can scale this up and down, and it's not really navigation, but you can always go and grab your handles here and also change your height and your width. Now, the reason that we're targeting that 0 point is by default, we've got target turned on. If you don't have any target, it targets 0, 0, 0 of the parent it's currently in. So if we put it into a null and move it over, it'd be targeting the 0, 0, 0 of the null. Now, having said that, we don't have to target the 0, 0, 0 point. We can go ahead and target an object. So I'm going to drag this monster in there, and we are now targeting that monster. I can go ahead and grab that, hit E for move, and move it around, and you see my light is automatically going to target that. In fact, I could copy and paste this light, move a copy of it over here. If I grab our monster and I move it up, both of those lights will be automatically updating and trying to look at where that monster has moved to. In addition to that, we can clear out that, and we can just create a target here, and right at the 0 point of where they were currently targeting, we're going to get some nulls created. So we got 2 softbox target nulls, and I can move those around, and we can of course grab one of them and just move one of them individually. So that's another way of being able to move this light around. Let's go ahead and delete those targets. We don't need them. And let's go ahead and we'll make sure those are cleared out. And let's go ahead and look at one of the last ways we've got to move this around right now, and that is the POV placement button. So up at the top of the light, we can click on POV placement, and what's going to happen is we're going to essentially become the light. Wherever we are, it's kind of become our camera. We can now use our navigation tools and move anywhere we want in the scene, and that is where the light is actually moving to. So I can move over here, And then we can click on POV placement again to get out of that. And now it's going to zoom out and my light has moved to that new position. So that is pretty handy. And just one last thing for navigation. If you have a lot of lights in your scene and you want to see what just one light is doing, you can always just click on a light. And that's what's great now too, is these lights are one object, one plugin. So you just click in the viewport and you've got that entire light selected. But if you have more than one light, you can go and click the solo button and now the other lights will disappear and you can just focus in on that one. So in fact, just to make this even more clear, let's go ahead and make another copy. So we got another light. Let's move this one maybe over there. And now we could grab this light and say, okay, this one, I want to give it some color and I want to solo it. So you can click the solo button, but even more handy than that, you can double click on the light icon and it's automatically going to hide the others. It's hiding it in a very simple, clean way. It's just putting it into a Cinema 4D layer where it's turning them off, hiding them from the viewport and hiding them from the render. So it is ready to just see exactly what that one light is doing. And now we could move it in real close and we could really crank up the intensity and maybe it's a little too orange. So we'll pull back on that. Maybe the cast light should be down, but we want the reflection up. So all that can be tweaked and then we can double click the icon again and boom, it's going to unsolo it and all the other ones pop in. And another thing that's nifty is you can double click on one. The middle one now is soloed, but I can click on this bottom one and it's going to instead solo that one. At any given point, double click on the one that is soloed and it will unsolo all of them. So that should wrap up this navigation video for the lights in Light Kit Pro 3. I'll see you guys on another video. Bye-bye. Hello there everyone and welcome back to the training for Light Kit Pro 3. In this video we're going to be talking about creating presets for your Light Kit browser. Now we already covered this topic inside of the Light Kit browser video, but I want to make one in isolation. So let's go ahead and load up our Light Kit browser. One of the best ways of saving your own studio would be to load up one of our studios and then modifying it in some way so that you can save it again. And there's a couple advantages to that. Let's go ahead and talk about that and then we'll make one from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and let's load up something like Dark and Stormy with Pedestal. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is this is actually loaded with standard and physical, but I don't want to render my thumbnail in standard and physical. You can make it look really good, but it's going to take a lot longer to render than maybe one of the third-party renderers. So right away, I'm just going to switch this over to Redshift. Actually, I'm going to switch our browser over to Redshift because when I double click it, it's going to load the materials in as well. In addition to that, in my settings, I want to make sure I'm loading a model in, and I want to match ours completely. So I'm going to load my spheres in. So I'm going to make sure everything's turned on, and now I can just go ahead and load in Dark and Stormy again, and now it's loading all that stuff in as a Redshift material. So that's pretty useful, and we've got our spheres ready to rock. So in theory, all we would want to do is set up some quick render settings. So let's go ahead and jump to our render settings. So I'm going to hit Command B. Let's go ahead to, in this case, Redshift, or if you have Octane or Arnold, whichever you want to use, I'm going to click Redshift. Now, all of our presets are expecting GI. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on GI for Redshift. I'm going to do 5 bounces, which is what we recorded all of our thumbnails at. You don't have to, but once again, it's just if you want to match our style. And I'm going to crank my samples way up because it's super quick. So now that I've done that, I've kind of set those basic render settings. I can go ahead and maybe even turn on my Redshift IPR and hit play. Let's go ahead and get this processing. And we can go ahead and make some tweaks to this. Let's change our lighting. So let's make this one warmer. And let's grab one of these and maybe make it a nice cool light. And let's grab this one and I don't know, let's go crazy. Let's make a nice bright pink on there. And I'm going to make it very reflective. Cool. And I got this nice reflective up there. And let's turn that into umbrella just so we have this umbrella reflection there. Cool. I like the look of that. But you can see the stick is showing from my umbrella. So I'm going to go ahead and go to advanced. I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want that to be seen by camera. So that is turned off. All of those settings will be remembered. So we've kind of got studio we like the look of. That's working pretty well for me. If I was being particular, I would go in here and let's do it. Why not? Let's just crank up our brightness a little bit and have that be way brighter. There we go. I like that really popping out from the background now. So we can go ahead and open up our browser. We can do that by double clicking our studio object if we want to, or you can click on the drop down again. And let's go ahead and just click Save Studio. Now, as soon as you save this, click on this, it's going to pop open this menu and it's going to tell you a bunch of things that I've been talking about here. But let's just walk through it. We have a Light Kit Studio object. We've also got lights inside there. We've got some stands in there, or we got, I'm sorry, some Cycs. We got the camera. That's all in there. So this is telling us that only children of the studio object are going to be saved. If it's outside of that hierarchy, it's not going to be saved. It will be rendered, but it won't be saved. It's going to create a thumbnail based off of your current render settings, but setting it to 16 by 9. And the settings in your LightKit Studio object will not be saved. So I'm going to say no, just so we can look at a couple things. So these settings will not be saved of there. Those are kind of supposed to be universal so they can be adapted to the user. And keep in mind, anything that you have inside of there is going to be saved. So I'm going to actually pull my spheres out because I don't want those spheres to be saved in my preset. I want those to be able to load independently based on the browser. So in that case, but let's say you did have something you wanted to be saved every single time. Let's say you made like a pedestal for like some Olympians, one first, second, and third, and you want that to be loaded. You could just put that inside of your studio object. That will be saved. We don't actually need this README, which is reminding us to set our GI bounces to 5. And actually, our materials will be saved as well. If you have any materials on your objects, those will be saved. If you want to do it really clean, then the best thing to do is actually not have any materials applied. But I still want to render with that material. So I'm actually going to hit Alt-G to group that and pull my material up one layer. And once again, these are just things to very cleanly and meticulously save it the same way we do. So now that we've got all that stuff saved, we've even got a camera, I can go ahead and say Save Studio. And I'm going to say, yes, I want to save a studio. So I'm going to call this whatever I want. I'm going to call it Chris 2 because I think I already have a Chris 1 in there somewhere. Hit OK. And it's going to down here say rendering thumbnail. It's rendering that in the background. And as soon as that's done, depending on your render settings, it can take a little bit longer. You can click on your user tab and you now see a perfect thumbnail is rendered out called Chris 2. So if we were to, for instance, pop open a new scene file and double click on Chris 2, boom, that's going to load in. Everything is ready to rock. And it manually added in the README. The browser manually put in the materials of our current renderer, this one being Redshift. And it automatically put the spheres model in. I'm going to open up another new file. And the reason for being careful and not putting in your own model when you're saving it is we can go into our settings. And I can say, you know what? I want to load the monster with it. And you know what? I don't want any stands and I don't want the Cycs to load and I don't want to link to the camera. So you can do all that. And now when we go to our user and double click on that, we set it up in such a way where it's now loading in the monster. It's not automatically linking to the camera. Any stands have been turned off and there's no Cyc. So by building it in those particular ways, it can automatically adapt and do it really cleanly. Having said all that, we could just jump back into that rendering file, which I think is this one. And let me make sure that it's the one that we've got our Redshift settings set, and it is. You do not have to be that clean. Let's go ahead and build something from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and delete everything. Let's go ahead and just really quickly make up a studio. So I'm going to go ahead and let's make a quarter dome. That's kind of fun. And let's go ahead and create a umbrella, and I need something to light. So let's go ahead and create a figure again. We'll pull him a little bit forward, and let's go ahead and we could make a Redshift material from scratch. I'm actually just going to apply the one I already had, the reflective one here. And on our Cyc, we could go and say, you know what? I'm going to make a Redshift material for our dome. So now we've got all that. We could go and start lighting up our little character guy here. I can go and make a camera. I'm going to grab the POV, and let's say I'm going to have my POV be off to the side like this. And now I'm going to turn on our Redshift render view. So we've got this IPR running. Let's turn that on so everything starts loading in. I can go ahead and just do my basic lighting stuff. Let's increase the pitch of this. Let's go ahead and move it a little further away. Let's go ahead and brighten it up a whole bunch with our master intensity. We'll go ahead and give it a slight warm tint. I'm going to go ahead and actually let's go ahead and make our studio object. So we'll make our LightKit Studio object and we'll make that a child of it. I'm actually going to click on the LightKit Studio object. I want a softbox. So let's make a softbox, make that child. And this one, I'm going to spin it around. The point being is you go ahead and make it whatever kind of studio you want. We'll go make this a cool light. There we go. Not exactly an amazing little scene there, but it is got that lighting going. Now, keep in mind, it's going to render as 16 by 9, so we want to give ourselves lots of headspace, or you could go and put your own render setting in there. But I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out a little bit, and let's call that a studio. So what do I want it to save? Well, I want it to save our lights. I want to save our backdrop here, our Cyc, and I want to save our camera, so I can automatically jump to the camera. The order doesn't matter here, but if you want to match ours, we go lights, camera, and then the Cycs. Now, if you want to load it, if you want your model to be saved in there, you can go ahead and put your model in there as well. Now, you see that we've got the materials applied directly onto these objects. So those will be saved and those will load with the object. So keep that in mind. But let's just, so we just built one from scratch. All you really need is to make sure this stuff is a child of your LightKit Studio. Heck, you don't even technically need a light or a Cyc in here. You could just save a model in there and save as LightKit Studio in the LightKit Studio, and that will be loaded in. But anyway, let's go ahead and pop open our browser. Go to, we just click Save Studio. We've got our warning message pop up, which you can turn off in the settings if you want to. Yes, I want to do this. I'm going to call it Chris3, hit OK, and it's going to now be rendering our thumbnail again. So that's finished. We can click on user and boom, it has created a Chris3, and you'll see that the model, it's got the light, it's got everything in there. So if we're going to pop open a new file, I can double click on that and that is going to load. And you see the model loaded with it and the materials loaded with it based on what we put in there. But you now see that it's creating a monster in the same place as our figure because that didn't get turned off. So that's just a reason to maybe not put a model in there, but that loaded up, it's ready to rock. Super clean, very fun. And just a really cool way of building those. Another thing to note about creating your own studios is right now they're being saved out to your local Cinema 4D plugin folder. So you can click open folder and it's going to show you all of the different presets that you've made inside of this folder. So it's inside of your Maxon Cinema 4D plugin LightKit user folder. Now, a cool thing that you can do is, first of all, let's say you have a team of people working on a project. You could copy any of those presets inside of that folder and move them out. But what I'm going to do is rename my user folder. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say rename, and let's just call it Chris Presets. Boom, I've made a new folder. Let's go ahead and close that. I've renamed that folder. If I go close my browser and reopen it, then you now see I have a Chris preset folder. So it's a way of creating your own folders and organization. And we've still got this user folder. Our browser has gone and made a brand new folder for user for you. And those are going to populate with any new ones that you make. Now, keep in mind, every time you save a new one, it's going to save into the user folder. If you make a new one and let's say you want to drop it into your, for me, I want to drop it into my Chris presets folder, make sure that you would pop this open. And let's say I'm in my Tokyo folder and I want to copy Cool Monster in. I'd have to make sure to grab my Cool Monster and drop it. And let's even just do it. I'm going to grab my Cool Monster. I'm going to drop it into the LightKit folder, and I have to go into my thumbnails and grab my Cool Monster and drop it into my LightKit folder. And now you see these are both in here. I want to put these in the Chris preset, so I can go ahead and drop the Chris Monster directly in there, or Cool Monster, and I can grab my Cool Monster JPEG, and we actually have to go into the preset and make sure that we drop that JPEG in the thumbnails. And now we've transferred it to that other folder, and now the Cool Monster should appear in the Chris presets. All we have to do is close down our browser and reopen it, and that has been rearranged so the Cool Monster is inside of there. So I think that covers all of the basics of creating and saving your own studio and then loading them back in again. Everything should be render independent. If you follow the rules that we did for the first one, then it will automatically be able to shift to all these other ones, and it's all completely ready to rock. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys on another one. Bye-bye.